Welcome to Cincinnati's Best Ever Real Estate Investor Mastermind webinar, the Airbnb in the Times of Coronavirus edition. So for those of you who are attending, and I'll repeat this later, we would love to have your questions. If you have questions or comments, if you could use the Q&A feature that you'll find at the bottom of the screen to ask those questions. I have notes for what I want to talk about with these guys. I'll get your questions into my notes and make sure that they get answered when it makes sense in the conversation. So we're going to have a conversation. I've got four successful Airbnb owner operators here with me. I'll ask them to introduce themselves in a moment. I'll tell you, I put this panel together for myself. I will be taking lots of notes and stealing all of your great ideas because I would consider myself a struggling Airbnb owner operator right now. As of a couple days ago, I have had at least one Airbnb for 2 years now. I, fingers crossed, should hit Superhost in July because that hasn't happened yet. I made the mistake of managing for myself for the first year. Now that I have someone else managing on my behalf, things are going much better, and that's going to be the reason why. But I have most of my questions, to be completely frank, are coming from me directly, trying to figure out how I can continue to turn the ship in the right direction. So if you guys will go, we'll start alphabetic order. Cody, Chris, Tyler, Kate, if you guys could give us a quick introduction, just your name again, your career outside of your short-term rentals, if it's not your full-time thing, what got you into short-term rentals in Cincinnati, and give us some stats for what it looked like before mid-March, what your short-term rentals look like, occupancy rates, nightly rates, how many units you had, where they are, etc. Go for it, Cody.
Cool. All right. Well, my name is Cody. I am a full-time pastor at a church up in the Loveland area, kind of northeast Cincinnati. And I got into short-term rental and into real estate in general just because I trusted people who were smarter than me. And so my wife and I, we were moving from Mississippi. And as you can imagine, real estate in Mississippi is dirt cheap. And as we were moving to Cincinnati, I got a little bit intimidated by the increase of house pricing. And one of my wife's relatives recommended that I house hack. And I'm like, what? And so he told me to go listen to the Bigger Pockets podcast. I went home, I mowed the yard, listened to the podcast, and I was on fire for this idea. It felt like cheating. And so I was like, I'm going to do this. Cincinnati has a good amount of multifamilies, so that makes sense. And then my new boss, when we moved to Cincinnati, introduced me to a real estate agent who was investor friendly. He helped me find the unit to buy. And then there was a guy at my church who said, you should really think about Airbnb in that space, because he had some Airbnbs. And so really each time I just said yes to like different people telling me what to do. And it's turned out really, really well. And so with my Airbnb, which is in a duplex, I partnered with that guy from church. Because I just bought the duplex, we didn't have the money to furnish the place really well, to do it really well. And it just kind of intimidated me. But this guy at my church, he said, we will furnish the place. So they dropped like $11,000 on furnishing this 2-bed, 1-bath top unit duplex. And my wife and I were living in the bottom unit. And this is in the Kenwood area. So right off exit 12, and Kenwood is 15 minutes to anywhere in Cincinnati, whether it's Kings Island down to the Red Stadium. It's just a really great central location. And so monthly occupancy, we try to keep it around 70% if things were normal. We cash flow around $1,000 a month for that one unit. And in April, my wife and I moved out of the bottom unit, and we started that as, right now, it's kind of like a medium-term rental. And so for the next question, I'll kind of dive into some of the cash flow of the combined top unit and bottom unit. But before Corona hit, just thinking about the top unit, we were cash flowing about $1,000 a month.
That's after your expenses, correct?
Yeah, that's mortgage paid, CapEx, utilities, insurance, internet, all that stuff.
And a lot of those expenses are not just for that unit, that's also for yours, where you live, because it's just one mortgage covering both that Airbnb and your home while you were living there, right?
Good clarification. So no, I am splitting it right now. I was paying rent to live in the bottom unit, and everything is sub-metered in my unit for the most part besides our water bill, but I just split that down the middle. So yeah, that was considering just the top unit alone.
Gotcha. Cool. Chris, tell us a little bit about yourself and your short-term rentals.
Sure. Hey guys. So I'm Chris Heichel. I am the general manager and founder of Liberty Hill Rentals. Pre-corona, we had 35 short-term rentals in Cincinnati. We own some of them. We operate some of them for other people. So a combination of sort of self-managed and managed for other people. Prior to that, my background was financial technology. So I actually worked for an online lender for 5 years, helped build out their operations and their processes, which has served me very well as we've built out sort of our Airbnb operation, because as you grow it, it becomes more and more and more about consistency and quality as you grow and automation and things like that. We are basically entirely based down in the urban core. So we have almost everything in Over the Rhine and CBD. We had a couple units up in East Walnut Hills. We've since transitioned those to long-term rentals, which we'll talk about, I guess, at some point, how we've responded to this whole thing. And yeah, that's a little bit about us. How I got into it is a lot more, I feel like, more random than like intentional. So, I knew in 2016 that I wanted to be investing my money in real estate as opposed to like a 401k or an IRA. So I bought my first fourplex, and then one of our tenants, they departed. It was a 3-bedroom. And I was like, it's going to be kind of hard to rent out like a 3-bedroom. And at the time we were actually living above it. And I was like, I don't know that I want like noisy people making noise below me. And so I was like, let's try this Airbnb, full apartment thing. And I had no idea if it would even work. Like, are people even looking for 3-bedroom apartments in Cincinnati for a day or two or a month? So I we put like IKEA in there, like just spent as little as we possibly could. And it worked out pretty well. So we just kept going.
Nice. Yeah, I started very similarly. My wife and I were house hacking a 4-family. And I've got a couple of small basement apartments that are technically 1-bedroom, but they make a lot more sense as a studio. Don't call that back room a living space, or make it utility space. Sorry, I mean like baseball utility infielder. It can be a lot of things, but not a bedroom. So nice, cool. And that's how long? Real quick, how long did it take you to get from that first? Maybe this will work on Airbnb apartment up to 35 units before coronavirus?
Yeah, so we went from 1 to 4 in about 18 months. And then from 4 to 35 was all between last April and like December.
Wow, awesome.
Yeah. So we went full speed ahead. I left my full-time job in April, and I was like, let's go. We're going to do this. We're going to do it.
That's really exciting, and I'm excited to hear. I'm excited to hear some more from you when we get into what's been happening lately. Tyler, tell us a little bit about yourself.
So, I got into real estate outside of Airbnb and short-term rentals. My focus is on flips and new construction. So I got into STR. Mostly because I saw it had a potential for more cash flow per unit. And it's kind of cool because it allows you to spend a little more on the properties than you would otherwise with long-term rentals. And it's kind of good to have another exit other than flipping houses, that for, kind of higher end finishes. I also thought it was kind of cool that it's a little bit more like the hospitality industry rather than, say, being a slumlord, which isn't really an accurate depiction of what being a landlord is anyways, but it's just a little more fun kind of interacting with the guests, that have kind of they're excited to come, as opposed to whenever you hear from a tenant, it's always like, something's broken or something's been bothering them for months, and then they finally tell you about it. It's like, oh, okay, well.
Oh, by the way, there's been water dripping on my ceiling since September, and it's June. Can you do something about that?
And now the whole place is moldy.
Yeah.
Never had that happen before.
Not with a short-term rental, no.
Yeah. So currently I have 1.5 short-term rentals. So I have one unit in Pleasant Ridge, and then I was under construction on one in Clifton when COVID hit. And then I just kind of pumped the brakes on that project. And I was like, well, I'll just focus on other things until this pans out, because I don't see this being a huge cash flow for me over the next few months. My unit in Pleasant Ridge is a single family house. It's a 2-bedroom. It gets about 80 to 90% occupancy. After I deduct cleaning fees, I get about $1,700 a month from that, where it'd probably generate about $900 a month as a long-term rental. So it's kind of a pretty good bump in cash flow from long-term rental.
Nice. Cool. Kate, tell us a little about yourself.
Hey guys. Well, I am Kate Zieverink, and I'm a real estate agent. I work on a team that focuses mostly on multifamily. So I actually got into real estate at the same time that I got into short-term rentals, because I agreed to step into a friend's shoes while he and his wife traveled the world for a year. He was a real estate agent, brought me on, I got my license, and I think I got my license 3 days before they left. So I took over his business while he was gone, and I also took over managing their house, which they decided to B&B last minute. So it's a 3-bedroom, 2 full bath house in Pleasant Ridge, which is kind of unique for an Airbnb, at least in the sense that of B&Bs that I had stayed in. Before that, my experience was mostly like staying somewhere when I was traveling, or when I lived in New Orleans, we would rent out our apartments during Mardi Gras or Jazz Fest or something and make some extra cash. But managing an entire house was a little bit different. So I managed that last year from March through December. It was a lot of families, a lot of people coming in for the Creation Museum or Kings Island or things like that. So it was a little bit different than kind of the clientele that I'm seeing in my own short-term rentals now. But it definitely was where I kind of got my feet wet and realized how profitable short-term rentals could be. And after I got some systems in place to run that one, I realized that it was definitely like a scalable thing that I could very easily do. So I think they made, over the 9 months that they were traveling, about $27,000. Maybe take home was like 19. So they were able to pay their mortgage the entire time they were gone, and then pocket, I don't know, maybe $5,000 to $7,000 on top of that. So that was pretty successful. And then as far as personal investments go, we are house hacking a 3-family in Walnut Hills. And our goal was to live in one of the units and then turn the other 2 into short-term rentals. And we have done that. We have one of the units that we're currently renting as a B&B. And then because of what's happened with COVID. We actually turned everything on maybe 3 or 4 weeks before everything started. So we've made some adjustments and we've been successful with one of those. And then we decided to rent the other one to a long-term tenant, sort of offset some of the uncertainty there. So that's where we're at now. We've got 2 units, and then I'm just took on a new project in Pleasant Ridge, and we're gonna use at least one of the 3 units as a short-term rental there as well.
Nice. That's awesome. So let's. I already have a bunch of questions I want to ask you guys, but we'll follow my pregame script for now. So there, out of our attendees, some of them are friends of mine, and I know they don't. I know some of them don't have any short-term rentals, and I believe a few of them do. So let's paint the picture. Tell me if I'm wrong. I want to hear from your experience. Sometime in mid-March, every single person anywhere in the world who had booked a short-term rental canceled, and Airbnb let them. So all of a sudden, we all have an empty slate. There's no one staying in any of our places. Tell me if that was not your experience, but also from mid-March through mid-June, up until a couple of weeks ago, how did that go for you? Did you, where were you able to get your occupancy rates? What did you do to adapt to the changes in the market?
Yeah, so mid-March and April both, we lucked out in the sense that in March we had some insurance sales guys in our place for a whole month, so they still stayed there. So March we cash flowed $1,300 on the top unit. In April, we had some insurance adjusters in town after a storm came through, and we didn't make as much, but so I cash flowed $620 on the top unit. And then in April is when we started renting out our bottom unit as well, which is furnished. It's a 6-month rental for a baseball player and his wife who are in town. And so, and luckily baseball is happening, so they're staying. But so on that bottom unit for the month of April, we did $970. So $1,600 between the two. And then May was my worst month by far. On the top unit, I made negative $10. We had someone throw a party in May, and because of that party, and they were just the worst kind of people. They were super loud, partying till 5 in the morning. It almost made the people staying on the bottom unit paying a lot of money to be there to move out. And so I was scared to death that we were going to lose our like medium-term rental. Yeah, May was a bad month for me. June has been good. I think we cash flowed around $2,000 between the bottom unit and top unit. Nice. Yeah, so did I answer the question? Is there anything else?
Just a quick summary of what I'm hearing, Cody. Your decline was slower than most and bottomed out in May, but it sounds like in June you're effectively recovered. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, and I mean, it's mostly this medium-term rental is huge for me right now, you know, in terms of consistency. So, yeah.
One thing that we did not end up going to any of the other longer-term websites like Furnished Finder or any websites that target people who are going to stay for a month or longer. One thing we did on Airbnb, though, was adapt the marketing of our units to demonstrate how socially distant they are. Each of my Airbnbs has its own front door. So from the moment you step foot on the property, you don't have to touch anything that anybody else is touching. So I think the term social distance is currently in the title of each of my Airbnbs. That's just a small touch, but hopefully that's one of the reasons we were able to get our occupancy back up. Chris, what about you? What have the past 3 months felt like?
Man, what an experience it's been. I'm sure everyone can relate. So I guess for the people who don't have Airbnbs who are attending, right, there's this sort of like dopamine rush you get every time you get a booking, right? And particularly, you know, I don't necessarily always have my notifications on because we have so many of them and I have other people who help me manage them. But, you know, particularly when you have 20, 30 of them, you're just always sort of getting hit with a little bit of like, you know, a little pep right in your step. It was the exact opposite, if not much worse in March. So I think it was like the 13th or 14th of March was like D-Day, where just cancellation upon cancellation upon cancellation. And I honestly, I spent like one whole day just in bed because I was like, I don't know what to do. No, I just wanted to wait and pan out and see where everything was going to bottom out. It became very clear pretty quickly looking at what happened in, you know, various Asian markets and things that we weren't going to see a quick recovery and this was going to be a pretty significant thing. So one of the first things we actually did was a bit of a reaction in the sense that we started seeing a really big increase in the number of locals who were trying to book our units to throw parties. And so we immediately stopped accepting any booking from locals that was less than 14 days long. And then for any booking that was longer than 14 days long, we had a really big concern that there might be people who were being evicted from their homes who would try to squat. So we implemented a lot of processes where we started doing court searches and super intense background checks of a lot of, you know, anyone who was a local who wanted to book, basically. That was one of the big things that happened. We switched to basically a 30 to 60 day sort of minimum on a lot of our stuff. And we were pretty successful getting travel nurses. And then we also made 4 of our units available basically on a charitable basis for anybody who was going to like Children's Hospital and was uncomfortable with the coronavirus situation. Basically, we would charge like $10 a day, $300 a month, right? You know, pretty much just paying our utilities, just because we knew we weren't going to fill them anyway. So yeah, March and April were not pleasant. We, you know, to put it lightly, we were sort of hemorrhaging cash. But then we started to see a rebound in May, right? We broke even in May, felt good about that. And then June was okay. You know, it wasn't what a June should be, but, you know, we made a little bit of money, so that's nice. And then July looks like we'll probably come in, you know, just based on sort of the pacing so far, we'll probably come in at 65 or 75% of what we would typically expect a July to be. We'll see what happens as far as the same day bookings and near term bookings go. I think one of the interesting patterns that we're seeing right now is that there are a lot more, proportionally speaking, people who are like within, let's say, 3 hours who are booking now. So a lot of people who maybe might have gone to like Hilton Head, South Carolina, or they might have gone to Miami or whatever. Right now they're choosing to go to Cincinnati or Columbus or whatever is nearby. So that's kind of interesting. So we're trying to figure out what to do with that. But yeah, I think, you know, and then the other big decision we made was we transitioned more than half of our units to long-term 12-month leases as well. So that was a choice we made in late March, early April.
Are those furnished long-term rentals or unfurnished?
We tried to do furnished and thought like, hey, maybe we can get you know, a little more margin or something by doing furnished, but turned out, you know, people don't really want furnished 12-month rentals. They have their furniture, they like their furniture, and they want to keep their furniture. So we now have a line item in our budget for self-storage that didn't exist before. So there's that. In case anyone needs the research on self-storage places, I've got the list of the best ones now. So.
Hey, start a staging company, right? You've got everything you need.
Okay, so actually it was nice because, yeah, we did get really good at staging our long-term rentals. So we got better rents on those than we might have gotten if we hadn't staged. So that was nice.
Nice. Cool. And how many So you came into you went into mid-March with 35 short-term rentals. Where are you now, and how many of it was two questions if you could answer them at the same time. Where are you now with the number of short-term rentals that you manage? And has there been a difference between the apartments that you own and the apartments that you arbitrage, that you're essentially renting from some other owner in order to rent on short-term rental? Is there a difference in your strategy with what to do now, depending on whether or not you own the apartment or you're arbitraging it?
Absolutely. So we're down to 15 short-term rentals now. I think I've always been of the perspective that arbitrage is not a real business model in the long term. So it's not something that I think anybody will be making money doing in 5 years. I think if you're watching and you're thinking, hey, I'm going to lease out apartments, then I'm going to short-term rental them, I'm going to make a bunch of money, and I'm going to quit my job, that's not realistic. Probably the only place where anybody's going to make money long-term is if you either own the asset or if you're a property manager. So when we think about our growth, we're probably going to primarily focus on growing through the management piece. I think we've gotten really good at maintaining quality while we grow, and we've got a lot of the processes around the cleaning, the accounting, the guest communication, everything. So I think where we're going to focus going forward is primarily going to be on the management for other people.
Gotcha. Cool. Tyler, what about you? What have the last 3 months felt like?
It was pretty crazy. I mean, right in mid-March, I had 100% of my future reservations canceled.
Yep.
Dang.
All the way out through, I think, late June or something like that. And I reacted by kind of dropping my prices, and that made my monthly rental extremely cheap. So I ended up getting a few reservations. Then I got a full month reservation, and then they actually went for another month. So that accounted for kind of a majority of the time. That was, March through June. I started to see a pretty good uptick in May of people that were not local to Cincinnati, but not far away by any sense of the word. Like people that just wanted to get out of Lexington, or like traveling from an hour away in Indiana, or things like that. And they all had interesting questions about what they could do in Cincinnati with everything shut down. And so I kind of got used to, oh yeah, here's all the different parks or like hiking trails that are still open, and all those types of things. It ended up in March, I had 11 nights that went unfilled, and then 4 nights in April. And then from then on out, I was pretty much booked normal. April was mostly just 4 nights because that's when the long-term rental happened. If that long-term rental didn't happen, though, I probably would have had a pretty good amount of vacancies during that same time period.
Tyler, in order to get those occupancy rates in March and April, I imagine you had to, like you said, drop your nightly rate pretty drastically. Can you give us a percentage, like going into coronavirus, where you were, what percentage of that nightly rate you were getting in order to stay booked during the bottom of the market, or at least the bottom as we've experienced it?
All right, so I won't do percentages. I'll just do dollar amounts.
Sure.
That way I don't have to convert anything. So usually my strategy was, for the winter, I was doing pretty well at, say, 120 a night for weekends and 80 a night for weekdays. And out into the future, I probably had it like maybe 90, 95 a night. And then as it came closer to the booking time, I would drop the price, say like 2 or 3 weeks out, I would drop it to 70, and 1 week out, I drop it to 65, and then 4 days out, I drop it to 60, maybe even down to 55 if I really wanted to bring someone in. And I basically just flatline dropped the entire thing down to like 55, 85 or something like that, for the future. And it ended up making it so my monthly rental was like $1,300 or something like that after the discount I was offering for monthly rentals. So that's, a pretty attractive price for a place that would rent long-term for $900. So I think I got probably 3 inquiries like within a day of each other, looking for various long-term options.
I know a handful of people who are just looking to get out of Manhattan during coronavirus who are from here, who figured out that they could get an Airbnb or use another short-term rental platform to get a furnished apartment in Class A neighborhood in Cincinnati for less than they would pay monthly rent on a long-term lease. And so a bunch of people in coronavirus hotbeds like New York City or the Bay Area, San Francisco, just came home where their parents are to work remotely, and filled a whole bunch of those Airbnbs at really low rates. Mm-hmm. Kate, what's your experience been the last few months?
I was going to say, we had to redirect pretty quickly. So we finished our renovation at the beginning of the year, put everything up in March, started seeing, a couple bookings here and there, and then everything dropped off. And we have, of course, no reviews. We're just getting started. We just put way too much time, effort, and money into these places. And so we had to sit down and have, pretty serious powwow about how we were going to regroup and kind of redirect. So we met in New Orleans. I have a ton of friends and family in New York, and that was some of the feedback that we were getting. We saw people kind of trying to come back home, people who started to look for long-term stuff. And then I also have family in various like medical, various medical professionals as family and friends. So someone told me about Furnish Finder as kind of like a medium-term platform. So we immediately cross-posted both of our short-term rentals on Furnish Finder. And that ended up being probably the smartest thing that we could have done, because we're now fielding interest from both sides. In April, we had someone book for 6 weeks. She was like a ultrasound tech at one of the local hospitals. We had some inquiries from other people. Definitely saw some of the people trying to just like throw parties, local renters for like 3 days or so. We nipped that in the bud right away as well. But we ended up deciding to rent the 1-bedroom apartment long-term, and rented our Airbnb to medical professionals back to back. We had a 6-week renter, 3-day break, and then we had someone book for 4 weeks, and then he's extended through July. So we've now had 2 renters, but I don't know, it's like 70% occupancy since the day we turned it on. So it's worked out pretty well for us in that regard.
A couple of questions for all of you. Thank you, Kate. And this, if you could answer generally or answer generally, also answer. So sorry, the questions are: is there an ideal occupancy rate for a short-term rental? Speaking holistically, generally, pandemic, no pandemic, is there a target occupancy rate that you see? Is it 100%? Is it 70 or 65? Does a lower occupancy rate mean that you're getting more money and because you can charge higher because you're not trying to fill all of those other spaces? Is there an ideal occupancy rate that you target? And how did that factor into the decisions you've been making during the COVID-19 pandemic?
I think there is. So I used to, probably when I first started, right, I put my first one up in 2017, right? I probably just thought like, hey, 100% occupancy is the best. Or like out of pride, like, hey, this is the minimum nightly price I'm willing to accept. But then you roll around to like January, February, right, when, you know, travel plummets every year, just naturally. And the first couple of years, I really didn't do well at all in like December, January, February with that first, you know, property we had. But then I figured out like, hey, let's try, you know, reducing the price to like 80%, 70% of what we would normally get, right? And then our January and our February and our December were actually pretty good, right? So I think there's an occupancy rate that's too low, and then there's probably an occupancy rate that's too high, because during the summer we had the opposite problem. We were at like 100%, and I figured out we could raise our prices quite a bit. So for us, what we target now, we target a 96% weekend occupancy. So we want almost every weekend day out of the entire year to be booked. And then we think if we're above a 75% weekday occupancy, we are probably pricing too low. And if we are below a 60% weekday occupancy, we're probably pricing too high.
Chris, what's your weekend minimum, if you have one, with that 96%?
During almost every month, our weekend minimum is 2 days. And during January and February, we make it 1 day.
Whoever wrote How to Get Paid for Your Pad, I remember that short-term rental book, and they talk about the 70%. Yeah, they talk about the 70% rule of if you're getting booked out more than 70% of the time, you could raise your rates. And so we try to do the 70%.
So I spent a decent amount of time looking at AirDNA, which is a site that kind of collects hosting, metrics and everything from actual reservations, or what they can identify as reservations, looking at the platform. And it seemed like there's all the ones that are outstanding performance got more like 60% or 65% total occupancy. And they were kind of in the high end. They had really nice features, good location, and kind of they were like the best of the best. And that's great. But I was looking to transform this house that I had in Pleasant Ridge, which isn't the top location somebody traveling to Cincinnati is thinking of going to. And it didn't have any great architectural features. So my market is more the mid-range, like family traveler or thing like that. And I found that I make the most money when I keep it mostly occupied. There's just not the top end of what I can achieve per night is just not that much higher than what I can achieve if I get it to where I'm getting 80 to 90% occupancy. But that's kind of the sweet spot for me.
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes sense. And I will say for Chris's short-term rentals in the urban core, I would suspect that the difference between weekend occupancy and weekday occupancy is going to be more heightened than it would be for people in other places. So that makes a lot of sense. One of the issues that I've had with my Airbnbs is that when I drop my rates too low, and this happened a lot. Yeah, you guys are laughing because you already know what I'm going to say. This has happened a lot in the last few months. I end up getting people that are not worth how much money. The hassle of dealing with them is not worth how much money that I'm receiving. To put it mildly, the amount of damage done to the unit is not worth the lower rate that that I've received. Do you guys, knowing how much your apartment, your short-term rental should rent for, do you have a baseline for, in the most dire of times, I will only reduce X amount or X percent because I know if I go below that, it won't be worth it? Do any of you have a metric for that?
I'd say probably when I was saying I reduced it down to $65 or $55, I'd say if I get down to $55, it's really not worth it. It's.
And you're normally at 120, so that's about just under half.
Weekday, so $80 to maybe 90 some, and I have nothing going for 90 some dollars for the weekday currently, but pre-COVID, there was some stuff that was closer to $100 a night towards July and in June. At $55, it's like $100, and it's like there's a chance there's going to be a new scratch somewhere, or like some sort of new issue with the property that I have to take care of now because of this reservation, like 1 in 2 chance. And at the end of the day, though, it's still kind of profitable. So I don't know.
So,
go ahead, Chris.
What I was going to say is we got hit with this early, like March 22nd. There was this insane, like 50-person party at one of our properties, and we hadn't even reduced the rate that much. And I had a knife pulled on me when I tried to break it up. I mean, it was crazy. We decided very quickly we would not be reducing rates. So we actually never decreased our nightly rate at all. We had significant discounts for if you're staying for 2 weeks or for a month, but we didn't drop a single cent for that reason during this whole COVID thing, because of that first experience we had, because nothing is going to be worth 50 people ruining your relations with your neighbors and ruining your property. But we also it was good because coming out of it, we also instituted a lot of processes that we'll keep using that will allow us to reduce the nightly rate in the future. So like we put in a lot of automation around e-signable contracts. And now if somebody who we deem to be high risk wants to book, they actually have to go through a whole e-signable contract process with us, not with Airbnb, provide their ID to us, provide a credit card to us. And so we've gotten actually much, much better at being able to collect on people, like security deposits, things like that, without even needing to go through any platform's processes. And that's going to allow us, I think, going forward in the future, to reduce the nightly price to things that we maybe wouldn't have done in the past. So pre-COVID, we probably wouldn't have dropped anything at any time below, any 1 bedroom below 70 a night, any 2 bedroom below 100. Going forward in the future, we might be able to do that because there's less of a damage risk and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I would say similarly, our 2-bed, 1-bath unit, we've not really dropped prices. Maybe during the off season in like January, February, we'll be at like $90 a night. But especially after the party we had in May, we jacked our prices up. And very similar story to Chris, but we use beyond pricing a lot for our pricing schematics of you just set a base price, and depending on the day of the week, the events going on, how far out the booking is, it sets the price for you and kind of automates that a little bit.
Quick show of hands, raise your hand if you use beyond pricing. 2 of the 4, gotcha. Tyler and Chris, are you using any other price management software? Or do you do it all manually?
We use AirDNAs.
AirDNA, gotcha. Tyler?
I do it manually. Used AirDNA's suggestion tool, but I Does AirDNA have a automated tool, or is it just?
It's semi-automated, so you can put in your listing, and then because it has all the information around like what's the median, the 75th percentile, whatever, you kind of put in what you believe it should be. So like, oh, I have one of the nicer listings. I should be in the 80th of price. And then it will tell you, here's the 80th percentile of what's being booked per day for the next 90 days. So it's semi-automated because then you actually have to go in and have those prices entered. So we have a process for that. But mostly because we have a good sense of like what things should be getting, we mostly use it to see, are there specific days we don't know about that are really in demand, or specific days we don't know about that are really not in demand? And so it's mostly helpful from that perspective.
Yeah, it's good to know. There are no in-demand days anymore, though.
Yeah, not yet. Are there any other affiliated softwares that you guys use to automate anything else other than pricing? Are any of you using, show of hands, are any of you using a software to automate some of your communications with your guests? Okay, what are you guys using?
We use your Porter app, and we evaluated 6 or 7 of them, like all the big ones like Guesty and whatnot. And we thought that your Porter app was the best sort of like value for features combination.
Your Porter, I haven't heard of that. How does it compare to things like Guesty and Smart B&B?
It's essentially all of the same utility. The user interface is way worse. So like it took us a while to figure out how to use it. And there's no ability to call a customer service agent. So everything is through email and chat. But the trade-off is that the price is like a third of what the other ones charge, and you get all the same utility. So it's just a matter of figuring out how to use it.
Gotcha. Cody, what do you use?
Yeah, I use your Porter as well. And so it sets automated messages out to the cleaner. It sends a message to me the day of check-in. It sends messages to my guests. It updates my profile or my Airbnb profile every day, which apparently raises your listing in the search results. So a lot of things similar to Chris.
Gotcha. Awesome. Back on track with the questions I had planned for you guys that I shared with you beforehand. Have you, what permanent changes have you made to your business plan around short-term rentals, given what's happened in the last 3 months? We've had some discussion about no longer lowering nightly rates because the clientele that are attracted to a reduced nightly rate aren't worth it. Are there what other changes do you expect to be permanent in your business model moving forward?
I think for us, we got into this with the idea of house hacking and just kind of offsetting our mortgage. And, we have a 9-month-old. I don't want to be super crazy hands-on. And even though we're living at the property and I thought it was going to make it a lot easier to manage, I'm realizing I don't want to be turning those units over every 2 or 3 days. So I'm kind of leaning into this medium term. I think even after things stabilize a little bit, there's still going to be a great need for medical professionals, travel nurses, things like that. I find that they're really great tenants. They're respectful of the property. Everything that we have is brand new. We put a lot of, work into it. So, I think people who are staying longer seem to treat it more like an apartment. You kind of build a relationship with them. You're communicating more often. So, I think we're going to lean into that kind of medium term for now.
Real quick, starting with Kate, how do each of you define medium term?
Weeks and not days, I think, for me. So I would say probably like a 2-week minimum, something like that.
Do you think about a maximum when it comes to medium term?
Before all this started, I think we had our maximum set at 90 days. And, right now, I think we had it set at 30 days, and now we have it set at 90. We have a guy that's renting one of our apartments right now for 75 days. So I don't know that I'd extend it much longer than 90, but that seems to be a good fit right now for the type of person that we're trying to attract.
Gotcha. What about the rest of you? Go ahead.
I would agree with Kate on the 2-week thing. I like that. I also read an article one time, and it makes a lot of sense about medium-term rentals for the majority of the year, and then doing short-term rentals during the summer when you make the majority of your money. And that just seems like a pretty good pace. So in the future, we might try to implement that short-term during the summer, medium-term, everything else.
I've had good success with medium-term previous to COVID. I would say it's probably anything shorter than a year. The biggest challenge is not booking stuff out early so that you actually have holes in your calendar large enough so that if somebody's traveling for a month, they can actually book your place. And it's kind of amazing the different reasons why people are looking for a month rental. And they're, in my experience, have been a lot better as guests in general as well. So that's always a good thing.
A handful of my month-long rentals have been people, a combination of things. In fact, we thought this might be our specialty for a while. Breakups. They were living together. The one on the lease kicked the one not on the lease out, and they ended up in my Airbnb. The other is people who got a job in Cincinnati and wanted to land here before signing a year-long lease. We've had a few of those as well. Chris, what do you consider medium term?
Yeah, I agree with the three of them. I think, and you, in fact, I think it's a lot of medium term comes down to like, what's the purpose of the visit? And you have to be really intentional now about like leaving your calendar open, having the place set up for it, so on and so forth. So I think it's a specific strategy, and you really have to be thoughtful about like, are you set up for that? And do you want to do that? And so on and so forth.
Chris, I've got a question for everyone. I'm coming to you first, though, because you've already you've made mention of a few things that prompt this question. Do you allow auto confirmation on your bookings, meaning a guest, if the nights are available, they book it, it's confirmed, or do you require that they message you, you have a conversation with them, do some follow-up before confirming their reservation? Do you auto-confirm? Do you do it manually, and why?
Both. So we state in our house rules, in our listing description, and anywhere else where we think a guest will see it, that if you're local, if you have no reviews or negative reviews, or if you're booking for the same night, that you need to send a message before booking. Now, about 50% of the time, they either don't read that or they read it and don't care. And so we also say, these same things, you're going to have to sign a rental agreement, do all this other stuff. We reserve the right to terminate your reservation. So like during COVID, we kept all of our instant book on, but we canceled on the guest probably 80% of the time. We didn't accept many bookings at all that came in through us. So we accept instant bookings, but it's pretty tailored.
So with you canceling 80% of instant bookings during COVID, has there not been a backlash from the Airbnb platform for doing that?
Surprisingly not. They already had the rule in place where if you were uncomfortable with an instant book, you could cancel penalty free. They do make it a little bit of a pain in the ass after you've done it too many times. So they actually did remove the ability to cancel same day bookings from our app. So we had to then call them. So I became an expert at getting through their line. But, the other thing is when when you put in your house rules a certain set of guidelines, you can have pre-booking guidelines. And so you can, in addition to saying just like, hey, I'm not comfortable with this booking, if they don't follow those pre-booking guidelines, like sending a message, you can actually use they didn't follow the house rules as your justification for canceling it. And Airbnb understands that as well. So they're a bit of a pain in the ass to work with, but at the same time, they do know what's going on. They're not dumb. They know that a lot more people than normal have been abusing the platform by throwing parties and things like that. And so they've been pretty understanding and have, for the most part, not been too much of a pain in the ass about it.
That's awesome, Chris. I'm going to implement some of those house rule ideas. That's great.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So raise your hand if you currently have instant booking on for your rentals. Okay. Gotcha. That answers that question pretty quickly. Getting through the last 3 months, what is the most important thing that you think you did wrong? And what is the most important thing you think you've done right to position yourself for success moving forward now that it's the end of June?
So I cleaned my house once, and instead of using the normal cleaner, I used some sort of bleach solution, and I didn't wipe it up afterwards, and I left. And every surface that was like moderately shiny usually just had streaks and it just looked terrible. The guests arrived, they freaked out. And I was like, oh, it's clean, it's bleach residue, but very sorry. It was also the only time I've cleaned the house in the last, it was, as COVID was starting, and it was kind of like a last minute sort of scenario where it was the same day booking and I wasn't going to have them come clean it that day. So I ended up cleaning it. So I don't do that anymore.
The two biggest mistakes, go ahead, Cody.
No, you go ahead.
The two biggest mistakes I've made with my Airbnbs, the first one was managing it and cleaning it myself. Cleaning it myself, I figured out that was a mistake almost instantly. But then managing it myself, I'm too busy. I think like a landlord and a long-term rental property manager, and that does not work in hospitality. I needed someone with a hospitality brain and a hospitality attitude managing my short-term rentals. My other big mistake, which we've already touched on, is reducing my rates too low. I have basement studio apartments. The location is 9.5 out of 10, if not 10 out of 10, but the apartment itself is not. So in order to stay competitive and get booked, especially not being a super host, I've had to have low rates. Going too low, there's a threshold there, absolutely, where you go too low and you just get people who are not worth what it's going to take. I would say that the one thing that we did best was adding social distancing language to the marketing of our short-term rentals and making sure it was clear to anyone who was booking our apartments that they wouldn't have to touch anything that anybody else had touched recently except for the cleaner who cleaned it all. So yeah, that's my low and high for the last few months. Chris, I'm staring at your face right now. You're next.
I think we took too long to decide to cancel all of our sort of island or stranded bookings. You'll have a whole week with one booking, and that thing is stopping people from doing the fabled medium-term booking that we're talking about. And we probably waited a few weeks too long to just go ahead and just wipe out the calendar and start fresh, because they all ended up canceling on us anyway. I think the thing we did right, or that we're doing right, is really thinking thoughtfully about like, what do we want out of this long term, and why are we doing this, and like, how do we want to be like playing in the short-term rental market? And I feel really good about the decision that we've made to really focus on helping other property owners and other short-term rental owners as a management company. So little plug for us. If anyone's watching and you have a property that you think might make a great short-term rental, or if you're tired of managing your own, give us a call.
Reach out to me for those of you who know me, and I can make sure you get Chris's contact info. Anyone else on the biggest things they got wrong and the biggest things they got right in the past few months adapting to COVID?
One for me was just learning how to manage the duplex while not living there. That was kind of a rough awakening in terms of doing laundry and just some other systems that we had in place that we had to relearn while moving out. And then I'll say one thing that I hope I'm doing right going forward. I can't say for sure yet, but we just bought a single family house near the church where I work in Loveland, and it has a walkout basement. And right now we are in the middle of making that walkout basement our third Airbnb. And we're trying to do some things to make the outside yard area just really fun for people. This sounds ridiculous, but there's a website where you can buy a 6-person hammock. Like it's like a 3.6-person hammock that we're going to have in the yard. We're going to have some great cafe lights and some just outdoor things to do because right now, especially with Corona, everybody is looking for a vacation close by. They're looking to be able to do some unique stuff outside. The guy that I partner with on my duplex on the top unit, he has some other Airbnbs. He has an Airbnb in Loveland in like an old farmhouse, but it has a pool. And during the majority of the summer, he's renting it out for $500 a night minimum because it has a pool. And I'm like, oh my gosh, there is something to this ability to have outdoor attractors.
I wonder if the insurance on that is scary.
I don't think it is. He's never mentioned that. And also, one cool thing he's doing is he's putting what are those RVs? They're like the metal RVs.
Airstream.
A what?
Airstream.
Yeah. He's putting one of those on the back of that same property. So then both the Airstream and the farmhouse can use the pool. And he's just doing it right. So I want to do more stuff like that.
I bought a kids like play place kind of thing for mine. Haven't put it together yet and put it on there yet, but that's coming, I guess.
Quick question. Someone is heading to Dallas for a couple of weeks at the beginning of August. How do you recommend they find a place to stay?
I would recommend going to one of the websites, Airbnb or VRBO, and just typing in what you want and then selecting the amenities you want.
And look through reviews for location. Make sure it's a safe neighborhood or the kind of neighborhood you want to be in.
And as far as the reviews go, if it's less than 4.8, it sucks. Don't stay there. That's like one of the main things as an Airbnb guest I've realized is like, if a place is less than 4.8, it may as well be like a 2.0. Like it just means they're horrible.
As someone who's been stuck at high 4.7s for the last year and a half, I have to say.
Oh no! Did I just offend you?
No, you're absolutely right that's the perception, and that's the perception that I've been fighting against. And I'll tell you, the issue is when I managed it, I didn't deserve Superhost. The thing is, I had 100 bookings before I stopped managing it myself, and so it might have been more like 60, 70 bookings. But it's a long road to hoe if you don't start out right. So no, you're absolutely right, Chris. That's the perception.
Sorry, Slocomb, I didn't mean to offend you. Now I feel
all
bad.
good.
I'm going to
No.
buy you a bottle of wine or something.
No, that's totally fine, because you're absolutely right. And that's a perception that I've had to fight for quite a while, because even though we've been offering, my manager hasn't gotten a review below 5 stars in 4 months. So the reason we haven't gotten to 4.8 yet is because of the reviews that are 9 months old now. So I totally get where you're coming from. Spinning this in a positive light, Chris. Question for each of you: how long did it take you to get to Superhost, and did you see a bump in your nightly rates, your occupancy? Were you really able to get more after you hit Superhost than you were before?
I don't really know the answer to that. I mean, when we first started our unit, we started really low in pricing just so that we could get some reviews. But past that, I don't remember when I hit Superhost or how it made a difference in bookings.
I hit Superhost right in the middle of the pandemic, so I have no idea.
Chris, how long did it take you guys?
I honestly, I don't know either. I don't know that I paid a lot of attention to it. I think it was like a year, but I think that's the minimum, right? You have to be a host for a year.
You have to be a host for 10
stays.
10 stays and 3 months or something like that.
I remember the very first chance we got, we didn't because we had canceled on a guest, and back then there was a no tolerance policy for canceling, and that is until COVID. I think that's the only time we ever canceled on a guest. So we got it pretty quick after that.
And what I'm hearing all 4 of you say, either through your silence or through your answers, is that you didn't really sense a difference after you hit Superhost.
No.
Okay. Well, if that's what happens to me in July, I hit Superhost and nothing changes, that may change my business model. Kate, did you want to jump in?
No, I was just going to say I'm not there yet, but I know that when I book travel, I don't book below 4.8, and I usually don't book if it's not a Superhost. So
yeah, absolutely. That's my struggle. And I'll tell you, it's I've had Airbnbs now for 2 years, and so starting on the wrong foot really does hurt you. One of the things, though, outside of coronavirus, hopefully this is helpful for someone who's listening. One of the things that's tricky about breaking out of Airbnb is, especially because you have bookings out in advance and you have some vacancy in between, you're looking at some large chunk of vacancy before you go back to a long-term rental, because you're going to want to let all of your guests unwind. You're not going to want to cancel all of them. And then you're going to have some time to un-Airbnb the apartment, unfurnish it, because like Chris said, the furnished rental market, I just haven't found. When I posted furnished apartments for long-term leases, the only people who were interested wanted to do Airbnb arbitrage. And we didn't go with that because we thought anything goes wrong and they just disappear in a way that a normal long-term tenant would try to stick around. Yeah, just the amount of vacancy that I was looking at getting ready to turn it back into a long-term rental kept me going. That and having someone else dealing with all the day-to-day, that also helped, even with as much as I paid them. What does moving forward, and I'd like to hear from each of you. And let's do the alphabetical by last name. So we'll start with Cody. What does your short-term rental business look like moving forward? Are you trying to build up a bigger book of business, more apartments, more short-term rentals? Are you actively getting out because it's just too volatile or for some other reason, or are you planning personally to hold steady with what you've got right now?
Sorry about that. I was on mute. So I guess I'm increasing a little bit in the fact that we bought kind of our dream house in Loveland, great school district, 6 minutes away from where I work. It's just the property that we kind of wanted. And we're thinking that through renting out the walkout basement, it's going to pay our mortgage and our expenses. And if not pay for it completely, then the overwhelming majority of it. And so with the unit, the walkout basement, we're going to keep that as a short-term rental. It actually wouldn't make a very good medium-term rental because there's not full kitchen. At our duplex, we will try to transition to more medium-term rentals. And I've made some good connections with some athletes who travel into town for part of the year. And I'd like to make some more connections with insurance agents and other people that need medium-term rental, medium-term rentals. And so I guess we're shifting towards medium-term rental a little bit, but we're open to the idea of short-term as well.
We are really cautiously going to grow, but I think very cautiously. Like we already had to have anything we acquired had to have a backup plan as cash flowing as a long-term 12-month lease. That's always been non-negotiable for us. I think for us now, when we do a pro forma on a property we're looking at purchasing, we're not even looking at the short-term rental returns because we don't even want to be tempted by it or try to read into the tea leaves of what the future looks like or anything like that. We are going to be very aggressive about growing the management side of the business, though.
So I was looking to expand, like my next 5 purchases were probably going to be Airbnb focused. And now I am kind of looking to balance it a little more. Because it's like Cody said with, you kind of have to wind down to switch it over to long-term, with the future bookings and whatnot. So I am also going to be looking for properties that will cash flow as a long-term rental. But the good thing is, in a way, I've kind of gotten a good idea of what the numbers look like for some of these areas in a worst case scenario, because there's probably not a whole lot of worst cases than that involve me worrying about any sort of financial instrument of any type.
I thought the same thing. I was like, okay, the only way it gets worse is like a world war or something, in which case, who cares about money?
Total economic collapse.
Yeah.
It's kind of an irrelevant situation for the future planning of money.
One thing I will say, jumping in there before we hear from Kate, as a long-term rental guy, I got into real estate as buy and hold, and buy and hold. Self-managing is still my A play. We are seeing a global level pandemic. We're seeing the shutdown of our economy. And one of the first things the federal government did was try to make sure that my tenants could still pay their rent. So one of the crazy, what are the doomsday scenarios where leaving your job, becoming a landlord, owning apartments long term, and making that your only source of income? What's the worst that can happen? Well, this has to fall pretty close to worst that can happen. And the federal government has immediately stepped in and just said, okay, everyone, here's some cash so you can pay your bills. Well, for about 40 people, I'm their bills. And so far as I'm concerned, I'm their number one bill. I'm their most important. Coming from the long-term perspective, we see this pandemic and what's happening in the economy, and the federal government and other factors larger than me are trying to make sure that there were options made available to people like me if we got in trouble, where we could postpone our mortgage payments, and cash was infused into the economy in the form of the government giving people money so that they could make their bills. Now, I know a lot of large screen TVs were bought by tenants as soon as those checks came in. But still, I don't know that there are going to be those large scale protections for the short-term rental industry. The federal government isn't doing anything for Airbnb owners. And they weren't necessarily thinking of me when they sent out those stimulus checks and sent out those stimulus deposits. But I got to tell you, I collected 100% rent in April and May and June, and July's looking good too. That's not a protection that I have in short-term rentals.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think a lot of people think that short-term rentals are a lot more similar to long-term rentals, but somebody else on the panel said it already. It's a lot more like running a hospitality business, which is what you're really doing. And you are running a business, and it comes with more risk, just like running any business does.
Yeah, hotels are still crushed right now. In fact, I wish I had metrics for this. I should have looked them up. I think the majority of people hustling in Airbnb are doing better than hotels are right now. But there aren't any large scale protections in place helping people who are in short-term rentals. Cody, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, I mean, people are specifically not wanting to stay at hotels right now because there's more shared spaces. So they feel more comfortable staying in Airbnb. So I'm just affirming what you're saying, that hotels are taking a harder hit than short-term rentals, I would say.
Do any of you use a specific short-term rental insurance?
I do. We did a lot of research on property insurance last year. And basically, as far as I could find, there are only a few companies, insurance companies that do business in Southwest Ohio that are willing to basically underwrite a policy that's intended to be primarily short-term rental. There's Proper Insurance, which I don't recommend. And then there's Berkshire Hathaway, which was not actually that much more expensive than our typical property insurance. It was like 20% more expensive, but it covered all kinds of crazy stuff, including like bed bugs and people burning it down and whatever you can imagine. So Berkshire Hathaway is who we use.
Does it cover a short-term rental guest getting drunk and drowning in your pool?
Yes, within limits. So there's
not the answer I was expecting.
Yeah, there's liability. We purchased a separate liability policy to supplement. But yeah, I can't remember the exact limits on it. Yeah.
I would say State Farm is really great if you're doing a house hack short-term rental. It was basically, I know in general State Farm is a more expensive company, but if you're doing a house hack, it was like it wasn't a lot of money at all on top of in order to do a short-term rental out of the other part of the duplex or quadplex or whatever you're living in.
Mine was insured with Foremost before, and I believe it still is, but I did get some clause added for a short-term rental, or maybe I switched insurance providers. I'm honestly not sure.
Gotcha. Question from an attendee. What is the best way to get short-term corporate rental tenants for a fully furnished 1890s farmhouse in Mason?
I mean, you're right up near P&G, so that's a really good start. Wi-Fi, just promoting really fast internet speeds. I know for some of my business guests in the past, we don't have TVs in the separate bedrooms, but I've had that asked for in the past. That was a request. I guess if you're having teams of people stay there, they may want to seclude at night into their own rooms, so maybe a TV would be beneficial. I don't know that I have much more on that one.
I actually put together like a one-pager marketing sheet for our Airbnb space, and got a couple connections from a couple friends who are travel nurses and things like that. So I have something like on file with someone at Children's, and I've passed it around to a few different people, and I've gotten random calls saying, hey, so-and-so person gave me your number. So maybe you could get in touch with someone at those companies like P&G that are, within close proximity to your rental, and just let them know that you have the rental, what the amenities are, and ask them to pass it around to anyone who's looking.
Awesome. Last question while we wrap this up for each of you, and we'll go in whatever order you answer. What is the best ever advice you have for someone who's thinking about getting into short-term rentals right now?
Find somebody who's doing it really well and offer to be a co-host for free. So then you can co-host, you can answer messages, you can see how they answer messages, and you can see how they run their business.
That's awesome. That makes a lot of sense. You hear that kind of answer in every segment of real estate investing. Find someone who's already doing it well and find a way to add value to them for free or at very low cost so that you can learn from them. That sort of mentorship, coaching, relationship, that makes a whole lot of sense. That's a great answer.
I'd say find a great, reliable housekeeper. That takes so much stress out of your life.
That was actually a question I was going to ask, is how you guys found housekeepers and or managers that you're happy with. Like, how did you go about, for a time when I'm no longer able to self-manage or not interested, how did you go through that process and find?
We've hired a lot of housekeepers, and every one that has been great has been a referral from somebody else.
That's been the case for me with my best cleaner as well, was a referral.
I used the Nextdoor app to find a cleaner, and it's worked out really well.
Our cleaner is one of our employees' wife, and she has kind of a network of other cleaners that she knows. So like if she's not able to, she'll kind of, oh, well, this other person can that, and there's about 3 people that kind of she can kind of refer a day to or something. And she kind of takes care of making sure that they understand everything that's actually required in it. But my best ever advice would be to find a property that you could get started with that also makes sense long term, and just research the market as well as you can. You AirDNA or go look at other people's calendars and kind of just give it a shot, because the market's solid enough that you shouldn't do terribly. And then you can see after a few months if it's something that you like to do. Keep your calendar booked short, so you only have to stick to it for another month or two if you decide you hate it, and you've still got the option to rent it out long term afterwards.
Yeah, I think my best ever advice would be don't jump into it until you get some hands-on experience, whether that's co-hosting or managing someone else's property. It takes a lot to get it set up, to furnish it, to make sure the kitchen's set up. Just thinking about everything that someone could possibly need. I think I might have even kind of overthought, and then we were late getting it started, and then COVID hit right then. So you don't want to overthink it, but definitely want to know what you're getting into, because it's a lot of preparation, a lot of upfront spend, and if you find out it's not a good fit for you once you're already in it, it's hard to reverse. So.
Awesome. So your best ever advice for someone thinking about getting started in short-term rentals: get some experience before you dive in. Find an opportunity to learn from a mentor. Make sure you have multiple cash flow strategies and exit strategies that are viable. And maybe most importantly, get a great housekeeper. Awesome. Is there anything you would like to add? And attendees, this is your last chance to enter a question in the Q&A. Do you guys have anything else you'd like to make sure that we hear?
Yeah, I think one is make sure that you don't need to go way over the top with how you furnish your unit, but don't buy everything crappy off of Craigslist and put it in a unit and think it's going to succeed. It's better to have higher quality items in your house, because you'll attract a higher quality tenant.
Are there any little extras that you guys like having in your apartments to make sure that your tenant has a good time?
We like to supply like all the streaming channels. So we make sure every property has HBO Now, Netflix, Hulu, whatever. And you really only have to pay for the subscription once, and then you can use it at pretty much every property. But people seem to appreciate that.
We do a $3 bottle of wine, the $2 chuck, that now actually a little bit more than $2, but people really like that.
Chris, do you advertise that all of the streaming services are included?
I can't even remember if we do or not. If we do, it's not like highly emphasized. Maybe it's buried deep in the listing description somewhere. It's more like.
You ever check the history?
Yeah. We have some. How people will like make profiles? We have some weird stuff. That's the only thing we need to figure out.
How to delete those profiles?
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I don't believe we have any more questions. Thank you guys. Cody, Chris, Tyler, Kate, appreciate you taking the time to add value to me, especially. I took a bunch of notes. Actually, I've got one last thing for you. So I currently have 2 small studio apartment Airbnbs, much more like Chris's location, just west of Washington Park in a small little residential neighborhood close to downtown. I could, by the end of this year, have 4 or 5 Airbnbs if I wanted to, essentially 3 studio apartments, and then maybe 2 bedrooms where it makes sense to sleep, up to 6. When I'm considering whether or not to take these long-term rentals and turn them into short-term rentals, is there anything you guys think I need to be keeping in consideration?
Right now, what we're seeing at least is that 2-bedroom units are harder to get rented out than 1-bedroom right now.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, presumably if we reduce the price on them to the same as one bedroom, maybe that'd be different. But our one bedrooms are actually doing fine now. Some of them are doing as well as we would expect for a typical June. So I'd say, maybe just take a look at how two bedrooms, like see what, is available near you. And if there seems to be an excess, maybe it might not be worth it, but the one bedroom should do fine.
I think Airbnb is really great for people who are getting started in real estate investing that has the extra time to make it a hospitality experience. So for me, living in a duplex, it's my only property, and getting to put all of my energy into that, I made a lot more money doing short-term rental than I would versus long-term investing. For you, Slocomb, for your giftings and for where you're at and what you're managing, I don't know if it makes sense for you unless the person managing your one unit is willing to do all of them and you get to be more hands-off, focusing on what you're good at,
Yeah, the number one piece to answering that question is if I can get someone else to do all the work, then it might make sense.
Yeah.
But I would have to have somebody else doing all of the work, and I would pay them accordingly. So that's another part of my metrics is there enough of a bump renting the apartments short term that it justifies paying someone well for doing all of the work, and I still make more money than a long-term rental.
You also have to consider the significant time aspect of getting it all set up. I don't know if your person you're having managing it also does furnishing and getting the place situated.
I pay her a fee for furnishing, and I give her a budget.
Yeah.
Nice.
I know a guy who's starting a short-term management company who has a warehouse full of staging equipment.
That's true.
I mean, Chris, I'll buy some of that stuff if you're interested in selling it.
Yeah, probably. Sure. We'll chat later.
Excellent.
Yeah,
so
furniture store.
Yeah, panelists, you're all on a group email with me, so you have one another's email addresses. Attendees, if you want to get in touch with any of these guys, reach out to me or to any of us in the Facebook group for Cincinnati's Best Ever REI Mastermind, and we will follow up with you there. Again, Cody, Chris, Tyler, Kate, thank you again. Really appreciate you guys taking the time, adding value to me and the other people who attended and to one another. Next month, we'll have another panel, and the title is Building Boring Millions in Real Estate. We're discussing the strategy of buy and hold, long-term rentals, the boring way, do it one at a time, self-manage, get those mortgages paid down, and become a millionaire through real estate as a side hustle to your full-time career. If that sounds interesting, then we hope to see you on July 28th at 7 o'clock. More info about that meetup and those panelists coming soon. Until then, thank you all, and see you guys next time.